In this video, I'm going to show you how to evaluate expressions. So this would be a good time if you haven't looked at the word wall or the vocab page to go ahead and take a look at what it means to evaluate. I'm also going to explain. So in this case, when we use the word evaluate, it means to substitute. So whatever you're given in for a variable and solve or simplify. And you can do these by hand, you can do them on the calculator, so I'm going to kind of show both, along with some steps maybe I didn't go over in my calculator video before. Alright, so first we're going to start off by doing this by hand. Let me get my pen. Alright, so for this problem, for n where n equals -8. So we're going to evaluate this problem and we're going to substitute -8 anytime we see an n. So in this case there's only one, and I'm writing on my computer so my handwriting might be a little sloppy, so excuse that. In this case we're going to go into and use the different multiplication symbols or the non-multiplication symbols. So you won't see me put 4 times -8 like you're used to, but I'm going to use parentheses. So parentheses are going to be a big part of when you multiply now. Another thing you need to know is anytime you have two numbers next to one another, two variables next to one another, a coefficient and a variable, so again that's going back to that vocab word wall. I'm going to be using those words a lot, so if you haven't again looked at that page, make sure you do so you understand what those mean. But if you have those two next to each other, they're still multiplying, even though there is no multiplication symbol in between it. It automatically means that it's multiplying. So now in this expression, I've substituted -8 for n, and now I can say I can multiply 4 times -8 and figure out what that is. Now, if you don't know what that is, you can put that in your calculator. I know that that's -32, so I'm going to go ahead and write that. Now, like I discussed in my important calculator functions video that you can check yourself, so I could go into my calculator and I could type 4 times negative, remember that's this symbol, -8, and I want to make sure that that is in fact equal to -32. So I'm going to go into test right above math, second math. I need the equal sign and I want it to equal -32. And remember, it's going to give me a 1 or it's going to give me a 0. If I got a 1, that means it's correct. If I got a 0, that means something is incorrect. I got a 1, this is correct, so I can say when n is equal to -8, this equals -32. Let's do another one by hand. In this case, it's asking us to evaluate the expression where n is equal to 12. So I'm going to put 12 into n anytime I see an n. Well, in this case, there's only one. So I would have -3/4 times 12. before we go ahead and do this, I want to talk about the negative sign in the fraction. Because notice in this problem, the negative sign is out front, but when I wrote it, the negative is now with the 3. And that's okay. Where you put the negative sign in this fraction doesn't really matter. I will say that you don't normally see the negative with the 4 down here in the denominator, but it can happen. If it's out front, that means the entire fraction is negative. If it's just with 1, it's just saying the numerator is negative, but because the numerator is negative and it's dividing, so remember that the fraction bar still means we're dividing, the negative is dividing the positive, our answer will still end up being negative. So it does not matter where I put this negative symbol. And now we can continue with this. I want to multiply this by hand before I check it in my calculator. And when you multiply fractions, you have to remember this one key thing. If you're multiplying a fraction to a whole number, you have to remember that all whole numbers are really fractions because you can write it as a fraction. I can say that 12 is the same thing as 12 divided by 1. And if you think about that, 12 divided by 1, well, that's still 12. So that is still true. I haven't changed the problem. It just looks like I now have two fractions. And when you have two fractions, it's easier to multiply them because now I can take this numerator of -3 and this numerator of 12 and multiply them together. And then I can take this denominator of 4 and this denominator of 1 and multiply those two together. So now I'm saying -3 times 12. So I know that is -36. And then 4 times 1 is +4. Now, in this last one, we didn't need to do anything further. We multiplied and we were done. However, that was a simpler case than this one. Because we have this fraction, we need to see, can it be simplified? You always need to simplify in every single one of these problems. So first, let me see if I can divide. -36 divided by 4. So if you're thinking, is that a factor of 4? I'm sorry, is 4 a factor of -36? The answer is yes, because 4 times 9 is 36. But let's say it wasn't, but they were both, I could divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2, and I could only simplify it. Well, like I said in the last video, you can use your calculator with the fraction bar to simplify fractions. So let me do that. Go second y equals, I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong thing, alpha y equals, there we go. We need that first option. I'm going to put -36 over 4. And of course it gave me -9. But had I had something like -36 over I was trying to think of a good one. 8. So I'm going to change that. That's not our problem, but let's say it was. And I put that in, it would automatically simplify this to its simplest form. So this is saying both of these are divisible by 4. If I divide them both by 4, I get -9 over 2. Again, that's not our answer for this particular problem, but just to show you again how the calculator simplifies for you. So going back to our problem, I can say that when n is 12 and I put 12 in here, I get -9. Now, let's say fractions aren't your strongest suit, and that's okay. You could use the calculator to do this problem. Just like we checked this problem in the calculator, I could put this problem in the calculator. So I want my fraction bar, and in this case, I'm going to put the negative before I put in the fraction. So I put my negative, go alpha y equals, so now I'm getting my fraction bar. And I want 3/4, so 3, and you can scroll down or press the right button. And then to get out of the fraction, I have to press the right button, the right arrow button. And then I want parentheses 12. So this is me saying -3/4 times 12. And when I do that, I still get -9. So whether you want to work it out by hand and double check yourself, or go ahead and put it in the calculator, either way works. Alright, let's do this next one by hand, and then we'll do this one in the calculator. If you feel like you understand how to evaluate these expressions, go ahead and pause this video, see how many of these you can do on your own, and then come back to the video and check yourself. Alright, so this one is asking to evaluate the expression 5d plus 1, where d equals -8. So I'm going to put -8, I'm going to substitute -8 into d. So anytime I see the variable d, I'm going to put -8. Now notice the only thing that changes here is the d. D is gone, and I've replaced it or substituted it with the -8. So the 5 should stay the same, the plus 1 should stay the same. We shouldn't be changing those at all. So if you're doing this by hand, you have to remember your order of operations. Whether you're using PEMDAS, GEMS, however you do your order of operations, as long as you remember that you would have to multiply or divide, whichever comes first, before you add or subtract, whichever comes first. So in this case, I need to multiply before I add. So if I multiply these two, 5 times -8 is -40. And then we need to add -40 plus 1. So this may be a good time to stop and pause for a second if you need this. I would look up a number line, or I may post that in a module later, so that you have it, just a number line that has negatives and positives. Because for me, it's easier to see addition and subtraction with negative integers than to try and guess. But if I have -40 plus 1, I'm starting way in the negatives and I'm trying to move toward the positives. I'm adding 1. This would be -39. Because you're going backwards. Kinda. You're going backwards to 0. And you could check that in your calculator. Just make sure you're using your negative symbol. To get that -39. Now, at this time, I want to show you some other way your calculator can help you. So let's say you wanted to just put this in your calculator. You can. I could have typed 5 times -8 plus 1. Your calculator is going to do the order of operations for you and find that your answer is negative 39, which is what we found. One other way you can use your calculator to solve or evaluate these expressions is to use this STO with the arrow. That's your store button. So that helps you store numbers as variables or vice versa. So let's say I have the variable d and I want that to be negative 8. I have to remember the order here. So I'm going to press negative 8 first, and I'm going to hit STO, so I'm going to call it the stow button, but it's really for store. And this arrow is going to pop up, and then I want the variable d. So d is right here, it's in green. I need to press alpha to get to it, and then I'm going to press enter. So here you just see that it equals negative 8, so you're not really sure what happened. But if I press alpha d again, it's going to give me negative 8. So now I've assigned negative 8 to the variable d, so I don't even have to type in negative 8 anymore. I could just put d wherever I have a negative 8. So I could do this problem again, say 5 alpha d plus 1, and that's exactly what the problem looks like originally. Yes, the d is capitalized, but that doesn't matter in this situation, and I can press enter. Notice that we got the exact same answer as when we solved it in the calculator as when we solved it by hand. So any of these methods work when you're trying to evaluate the expressions. Alright, this next one I'm going to save a little bit of time, and I'm just going to do this in the calculator. I am going to write it down so I can show you how to set it up. So I want to put 12 in for d, so negative 4, oops, my 4 looks a little funky, negative 4/3 times 12 minus 2. So that's how I'm going to put it into the calculator. And because I'm already having to put a little bit of stuff in, or it's a lot of stuff, I'm going to go ahead and use that method I just talked about, and I'm going to store 12 as d. So I'm going to type in 12, hit the stow button, and I want alpha d. Even though I just used the variable d, it doesn't matter, because now that I've stored 12 as d, anytime I use d on my calculator, 12 is now the number that's stored instead of negative 8. So this is another reason why we have to reset the calculator, because you've no idea how many times certain variables have been stored as numbers, or which variables, and if you go to use a variable, it may mess up your problem when solving if you haven't reset your calculator. But because I just stored it, it's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and do negative alpha y equals 4 divided, oops, I hit the wrong thing. Let's try again. Negative alpha y equals, I'm going to hit enter. I think I hit a number. 4/3. And then I want d, alpha d minus 2. So remember, you can't use the negative here. You have to use the subtraction. And it gave me negative 18. Now, here, because you let your calculator do all the work, now you have to trust that your calculator gave you the right answer. But there is a way that you can check to see, is this actually the correct answer? Did I actually put this in correctly? We could use that test method again. So instead of retyping this entire thing, I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to wait until it's highlighted. When it's highlighted, if I press enter, it brings that same expression or equation or whatever I had in that line, it brings it down. So I don't have to retype the whole thing. And then I'm going to go into second math. I want the equal sign, so I'm going to press enter. And it told me that it equaled -18, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in as my answer. And then it's going to give me a 1 or a 0. And it gave me a 1, so this has to be correct. So I can say that this expression equals -18. All right. For some of these, I'm going to move through a little bit faster now that we have some of the basics as to how we evaluate. And again, remember, if you feel like you got this, go ahead and pause the video, try these on your own, and come back and check your answers. All right. For this one, we need to evaluate A to be -4. We still need our parentheses. And in this case, the squared is outside of A. So when I put -4 in for A, or when I substitute it for A, the square still needs to be on the outside. So this is going to be a major problem that some of you may have. You put the square on the inside, or you forget the parentheses, and then things get a little weird. So make sure you have the square on the outside and that you have parentheses. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that in. Remember that there is a square button, so you don't have to use the caret, but you can. And I got positive 48. Okay, now I'm going to take this a step even further. Notice that this is the exact same thing we just did, except A is different. Had A been the same, so let's say A was still -4 here, then I can say, well, I know that when A is -4 for this piece, this would equal 48, as we just found, and then I could add 1. Because A has changed its value, I still have to go through and figure out what this is. But that's just something you may need for when we move to the other ones. I'm going to scroll up, grab it, and you're probably wondering, why did I do that if A has changed? Well, if I scroll to the right and I kind of delete what's inside, I'm going to hit second delete, or I need INS, which is insert, and I want to add in a fraction. So notice that I took what I had, brought it down, deleted the -4, and then changed it to a fraction so that I could put that 1/2 in. That way you're not having to retype the entire thing. Oops, I forgot something. Here, I forgot that this was just +1 because I was just doing the 3a². Now, I could go back in, so I went up and I grabbed it, pulled it down, and I can add +1. Or, let's say that did happen and you forgot to add 1. The answer you got, you could have just added 1 to. You would get the same thing either way. So just keep that in mind. So let me write this out. 3 times 1/2 squared plus 1 equals 7/4. Sorry, that's my email. Okay, now these symbols should look familiar to you, but just in case they aren't, these are your absolute value signs. So you may remember that absolute value signs means that whatever you have in there at the end can't be negative. Just in case this wasn't explained to you, the reason it can't be negative is because it's really measuring distance away from 0. So if it's at -3, or if inside you have -3, and then when you take the absolute value and you make it positive, some math magic happens and you make it positive. The reason that is because -3 is really 3 units away from 0, which is why it's positive. On your calculator, there is a couple different ways on how you can use or find the absolute value sign. I may have to play around with this for a second. Alpha window, I believe, yes. So if you go alpha window, so again, we're in a menu, and this is F2. ABS is your absolute value sign. Now if you're on the TI-84 Plus, I don't think you see these symbols, but you do see the ABS parenthesis, and that's what you need. Even if you went to alpha y equals like we normally do, because these 4 buttons are up here, if you press the right arrow, you could still get to that second menu option of what you need. So I'm going to go ahead and I need that. And then -3 times b, where b is equal to 5. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put 5 in. And I get 15. Sorry, these are supposed to be straight lines, but my mouse is being a little funky. Okay. Another place you could go, remember, like I said, if you ever forget where something is, everything you need is always in the catalog. And you may have seen this in my last video because it's one of the top things that show up when you go into catalog. So if I go into second 0 or into the catalog, ABS is right there. So that is also your, or another way to find your absolute value. Now notice in this problem we have 2 variables that we need to evaluate for. This would be a good example to use your stow button because you don't want to have to keep putting in different variables or different numbers for different variables. But if you like doing that or don't mind doing that, then that's fine as well. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Store 4 for A. Uh-oh, the arrow didn't pop up. Oh, it's because I'm in the absolute value. So 4, store, and then I need alpha A. And then I'm going to go ahead and store 6 for B. So alpha B. And now I'm going to go ahead and put in what I have. Exactly this same problem. So go to one of the ways you can get absolute value. So I'm going to go into the catalog and type in 4A minus, not the negative sign, 3B. And that gives me the answer of 2. If you were doing this by hand, you would put in 4 times 4 minus 3 times 6, all in the absolute value signs. What's nice about me just putting it in that calculator is the next couple of examples actually have that same exact problem inside of more operations. So in this next piece, I'm taking whatever this was, where A is 4 and B is 6, whatever that answer is, and I'm subtracting 5. Well, I know that this inside is 2, so if I subtract 5, so let me write this first. I know that this inside equals 2. So now what I'm doing is really substituting or evaluating again, because this entire piece equals 2, I can substitute 2 for this inside and just use this piece. Something else you can do on your calculator if you don't want to retype everything you have, if you have an answer already and you just go along with the rest of your problem, so I know I need 2 minus 5, I have 2 right here, that was my last answer, I can go ahead with my next operation and finish the problem, and it will say answer. That means the last answer you got, and it will solve this for me. Another thing you could have done is scroll back up, grab this, and put minus 5 on the outside. And you should get the exact same thing. Okay. The last part, I'm going to go ahead and type this into the calculator. -2 times this piece. So I don't want to have to type that out again, so I'm just going to scroll up and press enter. And now it's plus 5. And it put in all of that work and solved it for me. So I didn't really have to do anything except use my calculator just then. Now you could have. If you were just solving this by hand, again, this inside is the same as the last problem and the problem before that, so we know this inside equals 2, so I can substitute that inside to be 2. And go from there. Multiply these two. -2 times 2 is -4. -4 plus 5 is +1. So whether you are doing these by hand or on the calculator, as long as you're checking your work or going back over it, you should be fine. Okay. One thing I realized that I did not put in the important calculator video is square roots and cube roots, where to find them. So I'm going to go over these 3 and kind of show you where those are in your calculator. So in this case, of course you can still do this by hand. 2 plus, this is the square root of where x is 64. So I'm going to go ahead and put 64 in. That's supposed to be a 6, it doesn't really look like one, sorry about that. So here, if you know what the square root of 64 is, say you know for a fact that's 8, you can go ahead and say, well, I know the square root of 64 is 8, change that to 8, and solve. But again, you can let your calculator do the work. So your square root button is right above your squared button, and I believe in the translation notes we talked about inverses. or I may be getting ahead of myself. Either way, we'll talk about that a little later. So this is right above the squared button. It's in blue, so I have to press second first, and then I can put whatever I need in there. Now this one is your cube root. I'm going to write that really fast. Maybe if my computer lets me. So this is a cube root. So it's not a square root to the third power. It's not being raised to an exponent, but it's actually a cube root. So when you think about a square root, you're thinking two numbers that multiply, the same two numbers that multiply to be some perfect square. In this case, it's three numbers, the same three numbers multiplied to be a perfect cube. So here, you cannot use this square root for your cube root. To use your cube root, you have to go into math, and you're going to be using this number 4 option. Now I will say you can use the number 5 option, but you have to put 3 before you do anything else. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go back to the home page. If I press the number 3 and then I go into math and then I press number 5, it will make this into a cube root. But if I go into math and I press number 4, it automatically gives me the cube root. So just keep that in mind. So here I need the cube root of 27, and then I need to subtract 3. Here I got 0. So that doesn't mean that it's wrong because we didn't check it. We didn't put equals. It's not checking to see if this is right or wrong. This is saying the actual answer when we evaluate this is 0. In this case, that means that the cube root of 27 has to be 3 because the only thing that would make this 0 is 3 minus 3. And I can check that just to make sure. I'm going into math, press number 4, and I just want to take the cube root of 27. And it is 3. So you could have done that as well, just done the first, figured out what that is, and then did 3 minus 3, and you would have gotten 0. Alright, this last problem, we again have two variables. You can store them again. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and put them in. So I'm going to say 2 times the cube root, so I need to go back into math. X is 27. I need to come out of the cube root, so I have to press the right arrow. Minus, now in this case it says minus 3y, but it also kind of looks like it's negative 3y, so you have to kind of pay attention to, is it actually subtracting? Is it a negative? Later you'll realize that sometimes it is the same thing, so you really have to figure out which is which. And I'm just going to use parentheses for the y and put 1. And in this case, they said that the answer is 3. Really quick, if you were doing that by hand, we just found that the cube root of 27 is 3. So we'd have 2 times 3 minus 3 times 1. 2 times 3 is 6. Now this is negative 3 minus or times 1. Or you can think about this as 3 times 1 and it's being subtracted, which would give us that 3. I'm going to have the answers to the next page posted, but I would like you to try that page on your own before you look at the answers. But hopefully this helped you learn how to evaluate. And again, if you have questions or you want to go through something, message me and I can message you back or video conference.